So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Crystal Reynolds, and I am the Director of Marketing and Communications here at the Family Institute at Northwestern University, where we practice informed relationship-based behavioral health care and are committed to strengthening and healing children, adolescents, families, and individuals from all walks of life. As fall starts to ramp up, many children and kids are returning to school, and that includes college students that has left several parents for the first time in almost 18 years in a home without their children, which can have a tremendous effect on their lives. So today we are joined by Dr. Lisa Gordon and Samantha Arroyo to discuss how life might change once your kids leave home and ways to help ease into becoming an empty nester. So to introduce our panelists, first we have Dr. Lisa Gordon, who is a seasoned clinician who specializes in treating anxiety, mood disorders, and couple distress. Dr. Gordon works within a cognitive behavioral therapy framework where she strives to understand how automatic thoughts and harsh self-talk underline individual and couple pain and dysfunction. Dr. Gordon has worked within a variety of settings and levels of care and is eager to join clients on their path toward healing. Thank you for joining us, Lisa. Ms. Samantha Arroyo is a therapist in the Cognitive Behavioral Therapy program. Ms. Arroyo has previously engaged in community-based work on the west side of Chicago in collaboration with Chicago Public Schools, working with adolescents, families, and community members. Ms. Arroyo specializes in guiding clients in reclaiming their healing and building healthy coping mechanisms to combat anxiety, mood disorder, and trauma. So thank you for joining us, Sam. So to start our discussion, let's talk about being an empty nester. So Lisa, we'll start with you and just open up the conversation and say, why is making the transition to being an empty nester, why can it be so difficult for parents and couples?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this panel. I am invested both professionally and personally in the topic of transitioning to an empty nest. Professionally, I know that it is a challenge for couples to transition to an empty nest. It can disrupt their whole sense of who they are, who their partner is, the world around them, and their future. And then personally, our youngest of 4 children is a high school senior this year. So I am awaiting this transition, worrying about this transition, intrigued by this transition. I'm not sure the right word, but all of that I'm doing right alongside with all of you. So getting back to that question of what makes it so challenging, I think it can provoke so many anxiety-inducing questions, such as, who am I now that I'm not actively parenting? Who do I turn to for support? How do I move through my day if I'm not getting up with children to get them off to school or making dinner after gymnastics practice? How do I contribute? And what does my future look like? What is left for me? And then add to that, if that launch of children is any bit prolonged or bumpy, it just adds to the pain, heartache, uncertainty, distress that might already be there because of the transition.
Great. And Sam, I'll turn it over to you to discuss how that role of the parent changes when their child leaves home, and how does that sense of community that they once have that change as they become an empty nester?
Yeah, definitely. I think this is a really difficult thing for family to navigate. It's a transition, as any transition can be difficult, can be challenging. It's really uncomfortable. When you think about parenting, I think parents spend so many years parenting their child that it makes sense why that transition is so difficult. You spend more or less, I'd say, about the first 18 years teaching your children maybe basic skills. You're guiding them to have morals and values of their own. And you're their overall supporters, right? So you're the mental, the physical, and the emotional support for children. So then how does that role change? Well, I think the overall caring for my child, that idea, it shifts. And so do parents still provide all of those things that they did when they were growing up as children? Absolutely. And some of those things also change. So for example, maybe the financial aspect might change, that child becomes more independent, they're taking care of themselves, et cetera. And I think that once that shifts, it becomes more of the mental and emotional for the support. The support is not as physical as it once was. Maybe taking them, like Lisa said, to practices, or driving them around, taking them to their friends' houses, all those things that everybody does when they grow up. And so once that shifted, we're thinking about that independence, the independence that you spent 18 plus years teaching your children to be. It's here, it's in full effect, and it might feel scary as a parent. Yeah, so you might think, well, how did I go from giving my child everything to not as much now? And that's totally normal. I think that's why there's so many people here, because we're genuinely wondering, well, how does that shift? How do I get comfortable with that change? And I think to address the second part of your question, Crystal, as far as the sense of community changing, I think that works on a case-by-case basis, right? So we're thinking about families' culture, rituals, values, morals, etc., right? And how that changes within the family dynamic. But I think the overarching theme is that the child is no longer a child, right? This is now an adult child. And so now we're navigating the family as a family of adults and not a family of adults plus children. And that can feel scary for a lot of people. Does that mean that there's no longer cohesion in the family dynamic? Maybe a value shift, if beliefs shift once the child comes back or is around for a little bit? No, not at all. And I think if anything, like this allows the family to strengthen their dynamic, and really, build a sense of community. We want to accommodate to those changes as opposed to maybe being rigid or more resistant.
That actually really leads right into the next question, Sam. I'll stay with you. Can you discuss some of those steps that families can take to help support one another? Because you made a good point about it maybe not being a physical activity to more emotional. So what are some steps, or what are there some steps or activities maybe even before they leave that they can start to create to kind of continue that sense of connection after the children leave?
Yeah, definitely. Something that I always share with my families is communication is key. Communication is key, family. We have to keep that in mind at all times. And the reason I say that is because some activities may involve sitting down and having a conversation. Hey, let's call a family meeting. Let's sit down and talk about this transition that's happening. Let's talk about some of our fears walking into this. It may not just be the parents who are experiencing this, but the children as well. Yes, they become adults, but it doesn't mean that they don't need their parents. They don't need that support or that love or that transparency. And so it's nice to maybe call that and have that meeting so that everybody feels a space that they are supported, where they feel like there can be discussion around the change and actually being transparent about it, acknowledging it, and talking about their feelings. I've had other families who have more of a difficult time maybe expressing that emotional piece, maybe with one another face to face. And so what we've done is write letters to one another and say, hey, I want you to read this. And in this letter, you're gonna find ways that I want to feel supported and ways that I want to support you as well. And the reasoning behind that is because, again, this is acknowledging that everybody is coming to that transition phase, not just the child who's moving away, not just the parents who are experiencing that empty nesting. Another thing that I've had a family do before is family dinner. And they're like, well, how are we going to have family dinner? And I'm just like, we have technology, people. We have to use it. We have Zoom, we have FaceTime, we have all this at the tip of our or at our fingertips. And so once every other week, a family that I've worked with, awesome family, they all live in different places now, different states, mom, dad, and child, adult child, who moved away for college. Every other week, they go and they buy their favorite food from where they're at, and they take 1 hour and they sit down and they have conversations and they eat with one another over FaceTime. And it's super helpful. It helps keep everybody in the know, right? Like communicating with one another, letting each other know, like, here's what's changed in my life. Here's what hasn't. Here's how I want to be supported. So we're really emphasizing this support in doing things together as a family.
Yeah, no, that's really great. Lisa, I want to kind of drill down a little bit specifically on the couples. For some couples, like, their focus has been on their children, and they may have worried that they've lost their sense of self as a couple, and just they're really curious, how are they going to make, after this transition is made, where do they stand as a couple? Let's talk about ways that they could address that and rebuild their marriage.
Yeah, I can imagine that if parenting was one of the primary connections for a couple, when their children aren't front and center, the relationship may feel a bit shallow for now until they rebuild other structures and supports to hold and nurture the relationship. So other structures and supports. One idea is love maps. The idea of love maps is the knowledge of your partner's world. And if it's been mostly about parenting, you may not have updated your love map, your knowledge of your partner's world in a while. So ask some of those questions. Who are your best friends now? What are your stressors? What do you look forward to? What is the most important way to spend money? And update that knowledge. Another idea for supporting and holding a couple is spending time with other couples who are in the same stage of life, or maybe even a farther along, to mentor you. And how do you do this transition? And then another idea is have another baby. And by another baby, I mean another shared passion that joins you. It might be a shared interest like pickleball. It might be a shared mission like funding research for curing cancer. Or it may be a shared vision for the future, how you see retirement and grandparenting and working towards that.
And you mentioned about kind of creating these shared interests, but what about for some couples that feel like they're just really disconnected and they have really nothing to talk about now that their children are gone? What are ways that they can recreate natural conversations without it feeling forced, that revolve around each other and not their children?
Well, we can still talk about our children. We still love them, and they're still part of our family, even if they're physically a little farther away. And that's maybe how I would suggest starting the transition. Talk about your children. Plan together a visit to your children. Or if they're at college, look at the campus bookstore's website and together buy some swag for the grandparents, the college sweatshirts and the car magnets. Or create a care package together for your child. Start there, and that's okay. And then gently expand from there. Some other ideas for creating conversations. The idea of love maps. The creators of the love map, Julie and John Gottman, are marital experts out of Seattle. And they have an app called the Gottman Card Deck. Load it and look at those questions. They're all about love and sex and dating and the world. Start there. Or Google conversation starters for couples, or would you rather questions for couples. Put each question on a piece of paper, throw it in a jar, and choose a couple questions at each dinner time. You can also transform the kind of lifeless, how was your day question into something a little meatier. Ask about your favorite part of the day, your least favorite part of the day, or maybe something specific. How was your 11:30 meeting? How big of a jerk was your boss today? Or even flip on its head the idea of communication and your responsibility. No longer is your responsibility to take information or ask questions, but it's your responsibility to give information. Go through your day and challenge yourself to bring home to your partner something that you want to share. Something you heard on the news or read in the paper, something that happened at work, something that happened with family or friends, a thought that crossed your mind, a joke, a meme, a YouTube video. But it's no longer your responsibility to take or ask for information. It's now your responsibility to give and share it. And that might feel a little bit better.
No, those are really great ideas. I like the grandparent flag. But on the other side, unfortunately, sometimes rebuilding may not be the next step, and there could be couples that have decided to make the decision to separate and postpone it until the children went to college. And now that those children are in college, how do they move forward and maintain a cohesive co-parenting model for the child? Sam, I'll direct that question to you.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I had a family that I worked with, again, awesome family, who had this exact same scenario, where parents were separated for a bit and decided to fully divorce after child was off and away in college. And, a couple of things that I think a lot of people have difficulty acknowledging is that it's important to think about the relationship now as co-parents rather than what your relationship was as parents when you were partnered or when you were romantically involved. And there's a big difference in, parenting. Parenting is not easy, obviously. So now that we're parenting from a different perspective of this is my adult child, as opposed to this is somebody who I was bringing up into the world who maybe needed more help and assistance, that changes. So distinguishing, I guess, the differences and needs of this adult child and how they've changed over time may require less or it may require more. So as your child transitions, so do the parenting and the relationship between the parents, especially as co-parents. It's going to look different. And I think a lot of people have to acknowledge that and accept it. It will look different. It doesn't mean that it's not important or that it doesn't work. It just looks different. And so once we accept that new norm, it's easier, I would say, to navigate the family dynamic, because within families, and I always teach my families this, there are different dynamics. There is parent and child, parent and parent, second parent and child, sibling and sibling. We have different dynamics, but what makes it cohesive is that we have one relationship with everyone. How does that then play out as a family? And I think lastly, like the way that you parent shouldn't change. The capacity that you have as a parent shouldn't change either, right? So you still want to be there, you want to be present, you want to be engaged, but the relationship maybe that you had with your ex-partner, that might change a little bit. But again, the focus is not the romantic aspect of what the relationship once was. It's more about the capacity that you have to parent this adult child or this child in general. So showing up, being there, right? Kind of like what Lisa said, maybe doing things together with a shared intent. This is the intention we're having for this meeting, this gathering, and acknowledging that I'm here. I showed up, I'm here for my child, and I'm here to co-parent. So yeah, we're just understanding that there is a change from when you were in that romantic relationship to this now just partnered co-parenting relationship.
Thank you. So we've talked about a kind of maybe different stages that couples might be in after the children leave home. So maybe not at the point of separation, but each parent has developed different views on how they want to spend their free time. And, that could have come about in different ways, but how do those couples build a consensus so they can still share experiences together, but still enjoy those things that they've developed on their own that they enjoy? Lisa, I'll direct that question to you.
Yeah, thanks. So for this question, I would encourage everyone to make 2 circles, 2 pies, and that pie is going to represent how you spend your waking hours. We're going to divide those pies into 3 segments. The first segment is work, and that can be work inside the home, outside the home, paid, unpaid, however you define work. That's one segment. The second segment is play, and play can be by yourself in your hobbies, your pursuits. It could be with other people, friends, or organizations. And then the third segment is love, how you mindfully spend time with your partner. And then the 2 pies represent actually right now, today, how do you divide your waking hours among work, play, and love? And then the second pie is ideally, how would you like to divide your waking time among work, play, and love? And then the task is to compare your actual with your ideal. Where is there sameness? Where's there difference? And then also compare your ideal with your partner's ideal. Where is there sameness? Where is there difference? There's no right way of how to divide your waking time. It's just that if you've been longing for the children to leave home so you can, say, get back to songwriting, and your partner has been longing for the children to leave home so he can spend time with you, that might be problematic. So to look at those two ideal pies, and then the work is twofold. The first is to compromise. Where can you add and subtract slivers of pie, slivers of time to get to a model that's satisfactory for both of you, that fulfills most of your needs? And then the second task is to have compassion for yourself and your partner, just as it was an adjustment to welcome these babies into your home. It will be an adjustment to shepherd these babies out of your home. Pie making may take several iterations, and that's okay.
Thank you. I want to just shift a little bit to talk about the identity. We've talked a little bit about reconnecting and kind of going back into that sense of community. And for parents that have had their identity really just tightly connected to their children's activity, you've mentioned it before, Lisa, like going to soccer practice, gymnastics, that that was kind of what you did. You were a soccer mom, soccer dad. But now that their children are out of the house and those activities are gone, how then, Sam, if you could provide just some suggestions on how to keep the family connected and how to strengthen the bond between both parents and the children now that they don't necessarily have those activities to connect on.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I feel like part of it bounces off of what Lisa said. So when we're thinking about how to keep the family connected, I often challenge families to think about their role as individuals prior to being part of the family dynamic, right? So when you're thinking about a family, you're thinking about everybody as one, but in that one, there's multiple. There's multiple people, personalities, interests, hobbies, etc. And I think part of it is, thinking about how to have those conversations when you're changing and when you're evolving as a young adult, as a parent, etc. So something that I really encourage folks to do is talk about new interests and hobbies, right? Because we're changing and growing. Think about yourself when you were younger. You might not have the same interests, things that you might like to do now as an adult, or think about your child, how they've turned from a child who had this interest in one thing to a young adult who has other interests. Share those, talk about them, open up the door for that conversation. Because I think if we stay stuck, which a lot of people have a difficult time doing, and branching out and thinking about other things, then there's going to be an issue. I'll bring up an example that I thought was really great, again, with another family that I worked with. And when mom was younger, she had this interest in roller skating, and she loved roller skating. It was a passion of hers. And as she grew up, she kind of left it behind, and that kind of got lost. She had kids, and that was it. And so as her daughter transitioned into college, the daughter's like, I want to roller skate again. And mom was like, oh, roller skate? And she's like, yeah. So recognizing that there may be similar interests, it's a different stage of life. And so how do we accommodate to that? How do we say things like, I was interested in that before. Maybe that sparks a passion for you as a parent. Maybe that sparks a new passion for your child. Really sitting in that, finding shared interests, that's going to be really key. And something else too that I wanted to share was I was really reading this really great article about the concept of family resiliency and what does that mean, right? And so in the article, I remember the authors made this distinction between how the family can either rise up and cope with the issue at hand, or they can solely focus on the issue, making that the center focus, and then not seeking for the alternatives or seeking for better solutions. We get stuck naturally, right? We're humans. So we either want solutions or we want to stay stuck. And I think that's also part of the shared challenge within the family dynamic, right? There's a need to find meaning in your situation and view it as a shared challenge, as opposed to like, this is a parent versus child thing or a couple versus child thing. This doesn't have to be that way. I think we just have to find common ground, and having those conversations may feel a little bit easier than you think. We just have to acknowledge it and then take the time to do it, I'd say.
Great. Lisa, I'm going to ask you that same question, but a little more specific to couples that maybe their identity was just really around their children. And, this is ex's parents, and And what are some suggestions for that couple specifically? Maybe it's not the whole family, but just for that couple to stay connected and strengthen the bond between each other.
I'm so glad you asked that. I feel like this is the exact same question our children are asking as they launch into their new places and are trying to build new communities. So let's model for them. Let's be open to new people, new experiences, open to making mistakes, open to trial and error, and challenge yourself every few days, every week. Try something new. Say hi to that new person in an exercise class. Go visit the library if you haven't been there since story time. Try a new restaurant and introduce yourself to the wait staff. Be open. Be patient. If it took 18 years to create your community, it won't take 18 years to build a new one. It will take more than a minute though, and model for your children. Be patient and be compassionate. This is really hard work to show up, like Sam said, show up, share yourself, be vulnerable, all within the context of tolerating newness, anxiety, uncertainty, and loss. So be gentle with yourselves.
No, we've talked a lot about what families and couples can do, but we know it's not that easy, right? It's challenging to let your children go, and couples may worry about how their children would do now that they're off in college. They've dropped them off, they set up their rooms, but that worry doesn't go away. So Lisa, how can couples support their children without enabling them? So giving them the space to kind of grow up and become the adults that they are, but still be there as a support system for their.
I love this question. I feel like parents wrestle with it every day. And it's the very same question we've been asking ourselves since we brought our children home. Any point of newness, when they slept in their crib for the first time by themselves, when they took the school bus for the first time, when they played high school sports for the first time. For all of those points of newness, there was probably one of you that had a tendency to step in, to want to support and nurture and ease the path. And there might have been one of you with the tendency to step back and let natural consequences be the teacher, allow for growth. So think back to how this played out at all of those other points of newness. What worked? How did you manage it then? What do you want to do the same? What do you want to do differently? And again, there are two tasks. One is create a shared response that honors both stepping in and stepping back. Try to keep in mind what's healthiest for your child and not only what soothes your own anxiety and insecurities. Remember, it's our job as parents to raise young adult children who can survive and thrive in the world. It's a bonus if they love us. It's our job to make sure they can survive and thrive. And the second task is to manage our discomfort, our distress, when it feels like there's too much stepping in or too much stepping back. Manage our distress and support our partner in doing the same.
No, it's really great. This is a really great discussion. I just want to remind the audience, if you do have questions, you can start to put them in the Q&A. We did have some that came in a bit earlier, which continues on this same topic of letting our children go. The opposite side of that are the kids that are ready to go, right? They're already pulling away, and there are couples that maybe feel insulted that their college-age children, they don't want to do things with them anymore. They don't want to hang out with them more. And it's natural, and that might be easier for one parent versus the other. But you want to be careful not to push them away. So Sam, I'll direct this to you. What advice or suggestions would you give parents who maybe their child is pulling away and they still want to create that space for them to develop, but maybe they're feeling insulted or their feelings are hurt because their children are starting to move away from them?
Yeah. I think it's hard because parents' identity were rooted in being a parent for so long that once the kid starts to pull away, or children, if there's multiple, then people feel hurt. And, underneath anger, we feel a variety of things. Some people say they're angry, but really they're sad, or they're embarrassed, or they feel guilty of something. And I think part of that conversation, maybe between two partners, is I understand why this is happening. I understand where you're coming from. And maybe this is an opportunity to kind of come back to yourself as an individual. What are things that I'm interested in? What are things that, I want to do outside of just being a parent? It's an opportunity, but it's also a very scary opportunity for a lot of people. Are my children still interested in me? When you're 5, you want to do everything with your parents. And then you're 18, you're just like, bye. I don't want to be around you. I'm growing up. And, that can be a really difficult thing for people to acknowledge. So in terms of maybe creating that space, similar to what I said before, you can find shared interests. You can think about things that have changed and also acknowledge that, hey, maybe we have new interests and we can do this together, or we can do that together, while giving them the space to continue growing, learning, and just being. This is what happens when people become independent. We create that space, people create the space for us, and when we don't have it, we don't feel independent anymore. So while giving that space, I think just having those conversations of, what are we interested in now? I'm interested in this. What about you? Great. Why don't we try this out together? And if that's maybe watching a TV show, starting off small, let's only watch this show together because it's so great. Do not watch it without me. I'm going to see it on the Netflix. If you watched it, don't do it. Right. Kind of bonding in that way. So definitely thinking about, one, being individual, how to be an individual, again, outside of parenting and maybe your own interests. And 2, thinking about how interests have changed over time for your adult child.
Yeah, that's great. We've got a couple of questions similar to that on how you should manage expectations on checking in. And maybe the parents don't agree. One parent thinks it's weekly, the other thinks it should be more often. And then what do you do when that child doesn't respond? They're not necessarily going to be responding to your text as often. Just kind of talk about how couples and parents can handle that. I'll let Lisa or Sam can answer that.
Sam, you want to go first?
No, you can go first.
So I think it's important to distinguish what does your child need versus what do you need, and to be really clear. If it's what you need, especially in this beginning transition, you need to set eyes on your child once a week, to communicate that to your child and own, this is what I need. This is a transition that's really hard for me too. And this would help me be able to step back during the rest of the week. If I could see you, hear about a couple of things. I think presenting it as this is what's good for the child seems a little sketchy for your child's going to know that. So just really own, this is what I need to be able to do this transition well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think to piggyback off that, I really like that you utilize kind of like the I statements, right? This is what I need. And also part of that is acknowledging what your child needs. If we're, taking a step back and saying, well, I want you to be independent and I want you to reach out when you need the support, then acknowledging that that's okay too. Is it difficult? Absolutely. And that's where we have to sit with our own anxieties and our own fears about why this is important, why it's not important. And this is kind of going back to that first question of, what can we do prior to child leaving? And that's having that conversation. It's a tough one. How do we communicate? Is it okay if I text you to check in? Is it okay if maybe you text me a good morning and a good night? Or is it, best if we catch up on the weekend? What's best for you as well? So really taking a step back and acknowledging first, and then creating a plan collaboratively with your child.
Those are both really great answers. And just to dig into that a little bit, and I believe, Sam, you mentioned this earlier, leaving home, and it's different for different families and within different cultures. And what that means is understood in it can be experienced differently, and it could lead to some overprotection or some preventing that child from exploring the world, maybe based on morals or different cultural values and personal beliefs. So how would you help parents like navigate that conversation, or navigate a conversation with parents regarding letting go, and when it maybe kind of butts up against their personal beliefs or things that they've established as cultural norms within the family? And Sam, I'll let you start on that one.
Okay, yeah. I think, having that conversation is difficult for a lot of people. I'm thinking specifically about like first gen students, folks who've migrated here, things like that. It's hard. And I think part of it is because there is maybe something that is rooted in feeling abandoned for some families and parents. You're leaving us, you're abandoning us, and thinking about what that's rooted in. Why is it rooted in this abandonment or this fear of letting go? Is it rooted in parents believing that maybe when the child is gone, that they'll learn other values and morals, and they won't keep the ones that they were taught? Is it afraid of what society teaches, our children and adult children? Is there a fear that they'll leave and come back a new person? There's all these things tied in together, and expressing that is probably the most difficult part. Some people just say, well, I'm afraid for you to leave. I don't want you to leave. And really taking it back and helping your parents or your guardians reflect on their own upbringing for a little bit. Well, what about you? Eventually you had to leave. And what was that like for you? To become independent, to let society influence your thoughts and your beliefs, and acknowledging that you did come back and we still have similar morals and values and beliefs, and you taught them to me. Is there a trust that we have to build about me still, being part of this family and being here, being present and growing with you? What is it about? So I think it's a lot of questions. And once there's a response, I think really navigating that conversation from there.
Yeah, I wanna add to that, because I totally agree that to really look inside and see what am I afraid of. I think to add to that list is, for some people, they feel like if parents are not actively checking in, moving their child through the day, protecting them, their child will get hurt. And sometimes that is a fear and not a fact. And sometimes there's been some evidence along the way that their child does need that level of support and accountability. And so really thinking about, if that's a fear, maybe stepping back a little bit, collect the evidence. Can my child move through this world without me tethered? Or is it a fact? Has there been evidence? Do we need to put more supports on the ground in place? Or maybe that child is not ready to launch until we grow them up a little bit more. To really think about fear or fact.
And just with technology and the way that we're connected with people, are you seeing more? This is one of the questions that came in, more codependency between parents and children today compared to previous generations? Open to
I can start. I think there's a lot of different factors there, and a big one was the pandemic. It's changed the way that we view relationships, and for some, maybe the importance of being together, spending time with one another, depending on one another. That has really changed for a lot of people, and trying to be independent again. And I know we're still in a pandemic, but we're trying to build a new normal. That's also what these adult children are learning, is how do I build this new normal without my parent being here? Does it mean that I'm codependent? Not always. Sometimes it's that attachment that makes us feel secure within ourselves and within our families. Once we remove that and we shift into a new dynamic of being alone, as opposed to like always being with your parents or guardians, then we see that shift play out a little bit differently. It's difficult. I've definitely seen a bigger or an increase in codependency. And I've read a couple articles about it as well.
Yeah, I think for me, for many of these children going off to college, they've had about 2 years of education that hasn't been what other children generations have had. So they may not be as ready to go off to college as some other years of, of college freshmen. So there might be more concern. Understandably, there might be more concern academically, socially, emotionally. I don't know if I would call it codependence as much as a heightened sense of concern and slightly less readiness for many of the kids to launch.
Yeah.
Okay. That's, it's really interesting. You know, the pandemic continues to have these lingering effects that we see more and more. So we have a couple of questions that have come in. Again, if anyone has questions that they would like answered, please feel free to type them in the chat. We actually have two questions that are similar about parents, specifically one that was a single mom for 24 years with two older daughters, and they now have an 18-year-old that's going off to college, but they are in a relationship with someone that has a younger child. So they're trying to kind of move forward in this relationship, purchasing a home together, but still creating space for that 18-year-old when they come back home. So just kind of talk about this in the context of blended families. Another question came in about an empty nester has a relationship with a 6-year-old boy, just how they navigate, you know, they're becoming an empty nester, but they're also starting, you know, a new life with the younger child in the household as well. So Sam, if you have thoughts, we could start with you.
Yeah, it's a difficult transition, I'd say. You know, I'm thinking about my own family. We have large gaps with my siblings, and you know, are my parents, for example, empty nesters? No, because they still have a 13-year-old. And the rest of my siblings are gone. I think part of that is difficult because you had an idea in your mind already about what maybe this stage of life was supposed to look like. And once that feels different, or there may be a disruption, then we kind of have to go back to this original thinking of, okay, maybe I'm not an empty nester. Maybe part of my identity is still rooted in parenting. And we know that'll always be the case. However, it might look slightly different now because yes, we can still work on being individuals and, you know, semi-empty nesters, I'd say, you know, not quite there yet, but almost. But I think the important part is not taking away from the fact that you still have to practice being that individual outside of just parenting, right? Because the idea of empty nesting is scary for a lot of people. And so when we don't have that, then again, we go back to the drawing board and we transition yet again. So,
yeah. I agree. I think that the transition to an empty nest is a lot fuzzier, more nebulous than originally thought. Even when you do have children leave the home, they come back these days, whether it's going back to school or financial difficulties or a pandemic. I think it is a bumpy, uneven process that often does not look like what we thought it would look compared to previous generations. So like Sam said, to be open, not does this look like what I thought it would look like or supposed to look like. Does it work for us and our family? Am I getting enough of what I need? And not just compare it to this very rigid idea of what it's supposed to look like.
And similar with, you know, talking about multiple children, one of the questions that came in is that this parent has 3 daughters. The first 2 went off to college just fine and adjusted to their new environments, but the third, who is in high school and about to be a freshman in college, is dealing with social anxiety. So how can they start to let go when maybe this transition might be a little more difficult for that third daughter?
Yeah, I think one of the best ways is to convey that faith. I know you can do this. I know this is hard. And You've done really hard things before. I know you can do it. To have that really stable, loving, supportive home base gives an immense amount of confidence and strength to launch from, knowing that there's this solid base that believes in them. I think that's one of the most important ideas, is to convey that confidence and then also model for them that you two, like we talked about before, you two are making new friends and going into new situations and sharing yourself and share about your mistakes. I said the silliest thing. I introduced myself to someone, and actually I met them 10 years ago at your kindergarten party, and just share your own mistakes and the trips and the successes, and to normalize this is hard work, not only for people with social anxiety. This is just really hard.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think to add to that too, part of it comes back to the support, right? How would you like to be supported, while at the same time allowing me to give you the space to grow and be an individual outside of just being my child? Is it scary? Absolutely. And, kind of like what Lisa said, we want to normalize it. There's going to be so many challenges, and there's going to be so many fun things, and we're going to learn, we're going to have new opportunities. But I think part of it really just has to come back to that support. How do you want to feel supported by me? Does that mean myself or other parents can give you a call daily just to check in? How's it going? Do you need anything? Okay, great. Have a great rest of your day. We'll check in tomorrow, or we'll check in tonight. What does that look like for yourself and for adult child?
That's really great advice. We have one more question. So if anyone has any questions, please again type them in the Q&A chat. So this last question that we have in here is, in a situation where twins are slated to go off to college and one goes and one does not, can you provide an approach to how parents may navigate their new adult child's fears, shame, and their inability to launch? So I'll open that to whoever.
Yeah, I do like to think of it as a process that has lots of ways of going through it, lots of timelines. There's the launching to be a freshman, and then a sophomore and a junior, and then becoming an adult. And if this other twin is taking a little bit longer or starting a little bit later, it's okay. It's still launching, and it just is different, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think individualizing their experiences would be helpful. Maybe there is a shared experience of fear. One is starting college, one isn't, but there's still a fear. And what does my life look like at home versus this other twin at school? Really acknowledging that everybody has a path, and your path doesn't have to look like your siblings. It doesn't have to look like your parents or anybody around you. And being supportive in that way, acknowledging that independence is not rooted in maybe school or work, but independence is rooted in how the individual views it. And so just having them create their own definition. What does it look like that me staying home and also being, an adult? What does that mean for me now? How does that shift? Where is the change? That could be helpful.
Great. We actually had another question come in. And I'll direct this to Lisa or Sam, you can answer it, but can you suggest ways for traditional moms or moms who have been at home who want to go back to work, and how they can start to make this transition? So maybe Lisa, will start with you.
Yeah, I think the best way to start that process is to think about what you like to do, what you just naturally like to do, or where you like to be. Let your friends and family know you're looking for this opportunity. And I think networking is going to be so important right now. I know being a stay-at-home mom teaches so many skills and perfects so many skills as far as problem solving and communication and multitasking. Such a wonderful candidate for so many places. So let it be known you're working to make this transition. You'd be a great candidate.
great. So I'm gonna keep we're getting a lot of questions now, so we're just gonna keep running through them. Lisa, I think this would be a question for you. How do couples deal with underlying issues within the marriage that went on the back burner when the kids were home? So specifically, how can trust issues be dealt with during this time?
Yeah. I'm a little biased as a couples therapist. I would suggest couples therapy. It's been my experience as a couples therapist that couples come into therapy about 7 years after the original problems start, which is okay. And I love working with them. It is 7 years of building a hole that we now need to dig out of. So come in now before it's a crisis, and let's talk about, how do we rebuild trust? How do we show up in a way that feels emotionally, physically, practically safe and reliable? How can you be a safe haven for me to come home to? And let's start creating that. If it's never been there, if we don't have something to get back to, that's okay. We'll create something brand new going forward.
Yep, that's a great thought. Sam, this question I'll direct to you. For current high school seniors who are contemplating college next year, what do you think of a gap year, especially for those students who have been affected by the pandemic? You talked about this a little bit earlier. How can parents guide this decision for what the gap year might look like?
Yeah, and I think part of that is thinking about the intention behind why we want to guide that decision. Is it because we're worried about what that transition could look like, either taking a gap year or not taking a gap year? Is it because there is a fear for what that could do, maybe for the person's independence? And what does that mean, right? So I think that has a lot to do with the reflection of the parent and being open with the child about how to have that conversation. And sometimes it's okay to lay out your fears and, some of the things that you might be excited about, not be excited about. Having your child, your adult child, I want to emphasize that, ultimately be the decision maker about that choice is something that as parents, it's something we have to navigate, we have to be supportive of. So I really think it's rooted in what the intention behind the decision-making is and how we go about that. I hope that makes sense. Lisa, do you want to add anything to that?
I agree. I think support and helping your child find their own voice in what's important is a part of that launching process, to be the support. Let them make those decisions. Could be a great decision, could be a terrible decision. It'll be a learning process no matter what.
Thank you, Lisa and Sam. This has been a really great discussion. We just have one final question that we use to close it out. We've talked a lot. You gave a lot of suggestions and advice and thoughts on how couples can work together to rebuild their bond, how families can create that sense of community. For those that are maybe not quite there yet, maybe 3 to 5 years out, how soon is too soon to start preparing? Is there a timeline? Should parents start thinking about this earlier versus, the year before they leave? Just kind of your final thoughts on just starting that preparation process of becoming an empty nester.
Yeah, so I would take a look at the marital relationship, the romantic relationship. If there's conflict, if there are struggles, if there's mistrust, think about couples therapy now, not when the children leave home. I know sometimes couples wait until the children leave home to separate, and I can tell you that is just as much of a stressor as when the children are in the home. They're at a point of developing their own relationship. It creates questions. And it's still launching into a new world from an unsteady base. So really, I think get the support now for the relationship. Try to connect as individuals now, not only as a family. Try to connect as individuals now before the children leave home.
I think there's a misconception too about how to or when to work on relationships, and maybe that's we're going to wait until they leave to kind of focus on us as a couple as opposed to us as a family. So coming back to that and really thinking about why it's important to nourish that part of the relationship between you and your partner as opposed to you and the family right now. So yeah, what Lisa said, great.
Well, thank you both. We are actually out of time, so thank you both for joining us. This was a great conversation, and thank you all for participating and submitting your questions. As mentioned, this was recorded, and we will be sharing this out with those that registered. So thank you all again for joining, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye.